This administration meeting to order. Today is Monday, May 13th at 3 p.m. May we have roll call, please?
You, Chair Wade,
Here.
Committee Vice Chair Srinivasan.
Here.
Director Scozola.
Here.
Thank you. Currently, we have Director Showalter absent, but we have a quorum of our committee present.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to open public comment for matters that's not on the agenda. Do we have anybody present via Zoom?
No hands raised.
Okay, if not, I will close the public comment and go into agenda number 1, which is the consent calendar. Approve of minutes on February 26, 2024 Finance Administration Committee meeting. Questions?
No.
If not, I'll open for public comment. Seeing none, present or on Zoom, I will close the public comment and discussions.
The minutes, I don't
If
think
not,
so.
let's vote. It says no roll call, just vote by hand or?
Right, if somebody would like to make the motion and then second, you could just do a call to question.
Okay, may I have a motion, please?
Sure, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of February 26, 2024 Finance and
Thank you
Administration
very
Committee.
much. Second. Alrighty, we have a motion and second. Favor says aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Absent. Okay, motion passes. Regular meeting. Going to number 2, results of stress test analysis, and this is for discussion. So we have a staff presentation from.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, so the purpose of the meeting today, we'll go to the agenda slide. Let me click on.
I have to set it up. I got it.
It's all right. So the purpose of the meeting today is to present the findings of the stress test analysis. So I will go through a brief overview of the ERM framework. Remember the last meeting we had in February, we talked about the ERM framework, and one of the components of the ERM framework is the stress test analysis. And at that time, we had proposed candidate for financial stress test analysis, which is looking at a 5-year financial stress test. So at this meeting, we'll present the results of that analysis. And then we're also starting to look at uncertainty associated with load growth. You know, this came up in a lot of our budget presentations before. What about long-term load growth? So we're talking about strategic risks that we face with the load growth uncertainty. I will talk about setting the financial reserve targets, liquidity targets. And this is an approach we've taken the last few years, where we use the results of the stress test analysis to say how much liquidity should we have at the organization, so that in the event we were to face such a event that we modeled, we have the means to withstand that. And then we'll talk about the portfolio risk management under low growth uncertainty, and then we'll talk about next steps. Okay, so that's the game plan for this item. So you can just follow me then.
Yeah.
So recap of the ERM framework. So remember the comprehensive ERM framework where we look at the organization-wide risks. You know, the components of that includes a risk register. We basically record, take a record of organization's risks, not just risks and opportunities, things that basically matter in terms of achieving the missions of the organization. And then we have a risk matrix where we try to assess basically the significance of the risk, looking at 2 dimensions. You know, what's the likelihood that risk will occur? If the risk were to occur, what's the consequence? Not everything is of same importance, so we prioritize those that have more impact on us. And then the third component of that is the stress test analysis, which is basically, you know, where we take various risk drivers and we model, look at interrelatedness of them and say, what if some of these key risk drivers were to occur, sort of like a perfect storm? The way we like to describe stress test analysis is these are extreme but plausible events. In some cases, they've happened in the past. When you talk about volatility in energy prices, that happens all the time, go up and down. And that's what we've modeled is a price scenario. And this is one of the important parts of managing a commodity portfolio, because even though we have standard risk metrics that we monitor on a daily, on a weekly basis, it's gonna basically miss some of these, what we call the black swan, extremely plausible scenarios, right? If you remember the Silicon Valley Bank, they were criticized for not doing stress test analysis. They never assumed what would happen in the environment, the interest rates would go up. I think that would be such a basic stress test for them to see what their portfolio would perform like. Had they done that, they would have known what a financial trouble they would have been in. So that's sort of the idea of stress test analysis. Okay, so we have done stress tests in the past. I think this is our third year of doing it, and we have learned things from these past analysis, right? So in the past, we looked at prices going up, prices going down, power purchase agreements, defaulting, losing load, and then some other scenarios related to threats to our infrastructure. We're not repeating all of these stress test analysis because we know that when we're talking about financial stress tests, that the driver that has the biggest impact on us is actually not prices going up, but prices coming down. And we went through that in depth. We went through that in depth at the last meeting, and I'll touch bases on that again as to why price collapse is a bigger risk for us. I'll do that in the next slide. So this is a recap. I think I shared this slide at the last meeting. So if you look at the diagram on the left, if you look at the blue box, that's the rate that we charge our customers. That rate times the load, volume that we sell, basically that determines our revenue, right? And the way we want to set our rate is we add a discount to PG&E. Okay, so when a customer is our customer, they pay the rate to us. They also pay PCIA charges, right? So inclusive of PCIA, we want the customer to be below PG&E so that we are competitive with PG&E. So you can see if the PG&E generation line comes down, we have to shrink the blue box. If the orange box, the PCIA increases, we have to shrink the blue box. So that means price revenues going down. And the drivers that tend to basically shrink that blue box is, for example, when prices come down, right? If PCIA goes up, when prices come down, remember PCIA is legacy resources that PG&E transacted with, that they're saying now that the customers have left PG&E, those obligations go with the PG&E. To the extent that those are above market, that's the charge in PCIA. When prices come down, market value of what they've contracted goes down. The above market payment cost goes up, PCIA goes up, right? That's why when prices come down, PCIA goes up again. Orange box increases, the blue box shrinks. So revenues shrink. Same with the PG&E. There, for the most part, when prices come down, their cost of serving goes down, and that line tends to come down. So prices coming down has a big impact on us in terms of our revenues. So not so much price going up, and you might say, well, shouldn't prices going up hurt us on the energy procurement side? And that's not necessarily the case, because there we hedge our portfolio, right? We've locked in the prices, a significant portion of it. So we don't see a commensurate drop in our power supply costs, but we do see a big drop in our revenue. That's an important concept to remember.
Is there any limits on how high the PCIA can go?
It's a calculated formula, so it depends on what the result is. It's basically SVCE, your share of the load. And at the time your customers left, for us mostly was around 2017. PG&E took a snapshot. They said these were the portfolios we had contracted at that time to serve your customers. And here's the cost associated with serving those contracts and legacy resources. And then the market price is subject to market price, right? Prices go up and down. So there's no control of it. So market price times what their snapshot of their portfolio cost is determines. So there's technically no limit. It can go up, it can even go negative. In other words, if prices go so high and those resources become valuable, there are some vintages recently that became negative. So that's a
Okay.
possibility. And I'll talk a little bit about that in upcoming slides.
How long is those contracts? For example, we, SVC,
PG&E's contract, they go on for a long time so
but then the future, they would have,
yeah.
But-
So the energy contracts, like a lot of the big price renewable contracts that they bought to meet their RPS targets, initial RPS targets, those will roll off, right? Because as you said, they tend to have 15, 20-year lives, but then they have legacy resources like hydro resources, PG&E owned generation, those will continue. And Diablo Canyon is in there, the nuclear power plant, but that will be coming out of PCIA because now there's a separate agreement for that, where it's become a state resource serving the entire state of California. The state.
but in theory, they can sell those energy, which we have contracted to somebody else, right?
Yeah, that's why market prices matter. That's why when
Okay,
market price goes up,
Okay, that's
those
the
contracts
market
become
price.
money, and that's why I said they can go negative or they can go lower. Like
If
in
it
the
is
past 4
negative-
years, very lower. If it's negative, money will come to our customers.
Okay,
So
got it.
our blue box can increase. Okay. So this year's stress test, the financial stress test, that's what we're modeling. We're modeling what if prices collapse over the next 5 years? Do we have adequate reserves to withstand that scenario? And there are some other assumptions that I'll go into as well. And then, so that's for the next 5 years. And then there's always this question of what's going to happen with load? We know load is going to grow, unlike it has been in the past. What about longer term load growth uncertainty? So we're going to talk a little bit about strategic implications of load growth uncertainty. And this is building off of the discussion that forecasting group, Maren and our team had at the April board meeting. Remember we talked about forecasting function in-house, and they did a study session there where Maren and Jessica Fang explained how we do the load forecasting. This is building off of that. Now, basically looking at uncertainties around that forecast. So we will begin with the 5-year stress test analysis, and after that, I'll talk about the longer term load growth. Okay, so the financial stress test, what we basically look at is we model energy prices, right? We build a distribution as to how the prices how volatile the prices are and what the distribution looks like. And within that, we can estimate what the probability of a particular price range is. So we look at that distribution and we said, what if prices were to drop to the 1 percentile level? Statistically, what does that mean? That means if the modeling is accurate, there's only 1% chance that what we've modeled prices could be lower than that.
Oh,
Okay, so 99% it's within. And then what if there's an economic recession and we lose some load? What we model is a 5% load loss, similar to what we experienced during COVID. And then we also increase slightly our customer uncollectibles because at bad times people will have a harder time paying their bills, although our write-offs are very low, most in the industry probably area we serve. And then we add another additional financial liquidity stress. So in the past, what we've done, we had talked about Polar, provider of last resort. PG&E is, for our area right now, PG&E is the provider of last resort. In other words, if we were to not be in this business, all our customers would go back to PG&E and obligation to serve that load. So, and PG&E and other solar providers basically are saying, hey, there's a cost associated if you were to send these customers back to us. You know, in the short term, we could have a liquidity crunch. And we post a collateral, which right now is very low amount, like 47,000. But the proceeding that was going on at the commission, we could have been required under some scenarios to post 2 highest months of our procurement costs. That's it. A chunk of money, like 50, 60 million. The good news is the PUC just last month issued a decision that said, no, you don't need to do that. It made some revisions to the COLR posting requirements that are somewhat higher than what we have now, but nowhere near could have been. So it's a very good decision for CCAs. So in the near term, we're still going to post 147,000, but when some scenarios, because PG&E has higher administrative fees, it could go up to 2.
So when you say post, does that mean you put it in an escrow account?
Yeah, we kind of issue a letter of credit. If we were to default our customers, they can pull on that letter of credit to be back up with our bank. So basically, it's the cash that's tied up that we.
Okay. That's not an annual thing, it just sits there until they change the rate.
Until they change the rate, then we, most likely what's gonna happen is when they up the calculation 6 months later, it's gonna go to 2 million. If prices go up. So now that that risk is gone, what we continue to model in the stress test 2 highest months of procurement as a draw on liquidity. And that, what we're basically saying is it's a proxy for other business operating and regulatory risks. Just because we got a favorable decision in one, there's so many other proceedings before the CPUC that had adverse impact, not just CPUC at the FERC. We run a complicated business. If we meet, if we inadvertently miss some of the compliance targets, if we FERC says, hey, you did not participate, your scheduling coordinator on your behalf did not participate in the CAISO market, there could be risks and penalties. So this is an ongoing business risk that still stays there. So we're adding that as an additional draw on liquidity as a proxy for business operating and regulatory risk. Okay. So that's the financial stress test that we look at and how our portfolio, how our financial reserves perform if this model stress test scenario were to occur.
Question.
Yeah.
So the stress test, these 4 things, do you independently check or do you check the combination also? For example,
This is one scenario. So the prices come down. We have a 55 million one-time 55 million draw reserves. We have a load loss for 12 months. Is what we model over the 5-year horizon.
what happens if all the 4 conditions happen?
Yeah, we do model them simultaneously.
Okay.
Where I described,
Okay.
4 prices for the entire 5 years down. And I'll show you a chart of that, what that means. And there's a one-time draw on 55 million, let's say some regulatory decision came against us, some business operating risk. Both 55 million from us. And we had a load loss for at least 12 months. We don't expect economic recession to last. We modify 12 months for now. Load, it's only a 5% load loss that we want. And then other implications of that, for example, if prices come down, we could have counterparties asking us to post collateral, which, as I'll report, is not that of a significant. Okay, so then on slide 9, it basically lists our methodology for setting how we set the reserve targets. So what we will do with this analysis is refresh it at the time when we do the budget. Talk about that in the next presentation. We'll basically just price update, consistent with the prices we set the budget with, and then we basically test to see if this model stress test were to occur. Do we have enough cash to stay above 120 days of minimum target. So right now, our cash liquidity reserve targets are minimum of 120 days, target of 300 days, and upper target of 490 days. This is how we set the target and the upper target. Basically, we say over 2 years, we don't want to fall below 120 days. Model stress test were to occur. And then over 5 years, we don't want to fall below 90 days of cash on hand. So, and then the other considerations we consider is basically the feedback we get from rating agencies. If you remember the last year, we talked about our rating agencies, one of the big determinants is financial liquidity. They had also indicated that a good target for CCAs was, and just so happened to be what our analysis was supporting. Okay, so now we get into the results of the stress test. So let me give you some background. The energy prices, okay, when we talk about our portfolio, there's 3 important prices. Used to be one that was the main volatile price that was the most. It used to be the energy price we pay $1 for the energy. But now, if you know our portfolio, talked about it, we have resource adequacy costs, right? The capacity payments we pay, maintain reserves at the California ISO so that they can always meet reserves. And then there's the carbon-free prices, buying clean resources. And then there's RPS prices, those resources that qualify California's RPS requirements, those always trade at a premium. So we pay energy for a cleaner resource, we pay carbon-free, we pay a little bit more. For RPS eligible resources, we pay a little bit more. Unfortunately, a little bit more has become significantly more in the past couple of years. What used to be not that volatile, these premiums have skyrocketed.
What was the main reasoning for this huge spike?
RA is capacity is hard to find in California because as the old natural gas resources are being retired.
Right, yeah.
So that capacity part of that has become very tight.
That makes sense.
And RPS is some of the resources that used to come from the Northwest. As they have developed their own
Yes.
RPS, that has driven the market, and that's also what's also influencing. Those prices have gone through the roof. So energy prices, on the other hand, have come down.
Right.
What we are concerned about, energy price.
Yes.
But the good news, in the indirect way, good news is that RPS and RA prices are high, which is helping the stress test analysis. But the complexity in modeling is that the CP, when it comes to the energy prices, CPUC, what will determine PCIA is something called the market price benchmark, which the CPUC will publish in the fall. You remember our budget cycle? We do our budget, board approves it, start that process starting right now, actually. And board adopts the budget in September. And then in December, we take a relook at. That's the meeting where we decide, hey, how much additional discounts to really we want to finalize on any additional expenditure. And the reason for that is because we don't know the market price benchmark. We don't know PCIA, and we don't have good indication of PG&E's rates. That's the point at which we have somewhat of a good indication. You remember last year's budget, when we took the budget to the board, we were projecting a very low contribution to reserves of like 8 million. We took a revised budget in December, 8 million to 120 million. At the time when we took the budget in September, we told the board there could be a swing of 100 million. And the reason was because of the market price benchmark. We don't know what estimates CPUC was going to use for RA and RPS. For energy, we can at least get an indication because they use market prices that are traded in the marketplace. So we can see those prices in the marketplace and say, okay, we can use those to model, and we can model the direction that the market. But RPS and RA, because the forward market is not that developed, it's not that liquid, they use a sort of a historical look back of what load serving entities have entered into transactions for RA and RPS, like a 12-month or so, in some cases, in 12 months, look back, and then they say, okay, so we don't know what that estimate is going to be. So in modeling, that makes it difficult. You know, it already complicates a complicated. So what we have done for this stress test analysis is we said, okay, there's a few ways in which we can look at RA and RPS prices for forecasting market price benchmark. We said we can look at prices that we see on the market, incremental market prices that we're paying, and use those estimates. Those are very high. We can basically, if we use those estimates, you know, just the revenue for next year could go up to like 600 million. You know, but if we said, okay, what if we look at last year, what the market price was then, what the market price benchmark, the CPUC came in with, you know, what was that ratio? What was that discount applied to market prices? What if we applied that same factor adjustment to the current market we were observing? We took that approach and we say, okay, revenues will be 400. And then we look at a consultant's model, Newgen. It's their model that we basically use to forecast PCIA. We take their model. It's a fairly good model. We update it for the prices that we forecast or we see market for energy prices. What if we just use the prices that's in there, and that's basically based on last year's market price benchmark, because they don't know what the CPUC is. And that lower estimate comes to 385 million. So you can see just this one factor of market price benchmark, $215 million swing. The budget, we can be either negative contribution to reserve, or we can be a huge contribution to reserve. That's how volatile this parameter is. For the stress test, being that we're looking at extreme but plausible scenarios, we're using the lower end of this range. Looking at basically using the Newgen RA-RPS prices. Okay, so this chart here shows you the commodity price, okay? And these are forward prices. And what do I mean by forward prices? This means if I were to say, hey, marketplace, I want a contract for energy for delivery in calendar year 2025, I lock in a price, I can go to the marketplace and I can observe, because it's traded just like any other traded commodity or traded instrument. I can observe what the market price is. And what this chart shows is how those forward prices over time has trended. You know? So each line is basically a different calendar year's average prices that have traded. So where lower end, there's 18 months ago, for example, where prices for 2025 was 18 months ago. If I were to lock in calendar year 2025, what I would have paid. You can see prices took low, then they took a dive up, and you can see recently they've all come down. So this on its own and putting a downward pressure on our financials, meaning PCIA will go up. Now let's look at.
So there's an annual variation, I mean, because they're different, but sort of the general shape of it varies during the year.
Yeah, this has to do, just like you can chart Apple stock over time.
Yeah, like there's no hydropower, I can imagine.
This is for calendar year. This is what people are projecting for next year, for example, when hydro forecasts are coming up, the market's expectations will change and prices will change. Just like in Apple stocks, if the earnings is coming out and people are expecting good earnings, the price will like that. So this is very much driven by market, how market perceives the fundamentals. That's how that dictates the trading. So right now there's a downward pressure on the commodity prices because they think sufficient energy in the CAISO.
But 2024 has dipped quite a bit compared to
Yeah.
other things,
Yeah.
right?
So we know that this is going to be a pretty good hydro year, for example. It's going to be above average because our reservoirs. So that's one fundamental that's probably factored into that.
But how come 2025 is not?
That's again, it's like asking why is IBM trading higher than Apple,
Okay.
right? So it's those fundamental differences. So 2025, when they're looking at it, they're saying, at best, maybe we'll assume it's an average hydro year. And then I know Diablo Canyon will be available. I know some great resources will be retiring, some resources coming online. All those factor into what market, assuming where the price should be. This is not our forecast. This is where market is trading.
Yeah.
And then on the right side, we show basically for the stress test analysis, when we say prices collapse to the 1 percentile level, that's the 1 percentile level, which is not that unheard of because, like 3 years ago, we were seeing prices at these levels.
But only for a short time.
Yeah. I mean, prices are volatile. No one can predict how long they're going to be at that particular sustained level, how long, And one of the things that's actually helping energy prices come down is natural gas prices. Significantly, and this year in particular, talking about 2024 energy prices being down, natural gas is really part of the reason is we had the mild winter, there were no shut-ins in the wells. There's still a lot of gas in the storage, so we know that there will be less demand, fill storage. Our natural gas is still on the margin setting electricity prices, so that's another factor that's. Okay, so we know we go to the less liquid prices, RA prices and RPS prices. So what we model on the left side or the past is where the CPUC's market price benchmark is. I mean, if you can look at it, it wasn't much of an issue before 2022. Then you can see 2022, a big jump, and you can see last year, huge jump in both RA and RPS prices. And that's what contributed to that $100 million or so swing in this fiscal year's budget. That's the uncertainty we're facing with. And the line to the chart shows what our base case modeled, what we were assuming. Here we have to make some judgment. We don't have those liquid. We have some observed forward market prices, but not as liquid prices as we have. And then we can see on the boxes there, model stress test prices. So this is what's driving the uncertainty here. We can either have it's going to be similar story as last year budget. We can either have a very good year or we can have a year that we're actually drawing. A lot of this will depend on the market price benchmark. So in this slide, we talk a little bit about the base case. And remember, the base case, we're using the lower end of the RPS RA prices, basically what's in the consultant's model, which is last year's price benchmarks. So if the model assumptions were to prevail, the base case, the numbers are shown in the appendix in detail. It basically shows the reserves falling from forecast level of 420 million down to 368 million. And then bounce up and around and ending 5-year at 360 under the base case scenario. And this is, there's a lot of uncertainty. A lot of uncertainty next year. Imagine how much uncertainty there is 5 years out. So we don't want to focus so much on the absolute value of these numbers. What we want to focus on is the delta between the stress case and the base case. That can shed more light on our strategic. So turning to the stress case, if the model scenario were to occur, right? If what I said is our extreme but plausible scenario, if that next year were to happen, by the way, the scenarios that I'm talking about are not unheard of. An appendix in the appendix, and we shared that at the last finance committee meeting showed financial crisis, how commodity prices in a matter of few months dropped like 70%. And these are less than 70% drop. So it's not unheard of. And they're extreme, but plausible. Have happened.
That's one of the things I'm a little confused about is, if you look at the volatility of the prices, they varied a lot sort of all over the year. And that 1% number, you have it going, I mean, how long would you expect it to stay there to create problems?
So in the way we modeled it, we modeled the entire forward curve. Remember each year had its own forward prices. Each year is trading at different. Think of each of those 5 years as 5 different stocks trading. And they have their own attributes that determine their market price. We determined what if at the level they're in, they all were to go to the 1 percentile level.
Okay, so they would stay at it.
Yeah, so it's an extreme case.
So it's not like if it just goes down for one
Yeah.
day, you got a problem. It's if it stays there
It
for
stays
months and
there.
months. Yeah.
We're like flooded with natural gas. Resources, people build like boom, and then there's a recession, then load growth doesn't materialize. Prices are sustainably low. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good question. Okay, so if the model stress test were to occur, I have a typo there. I said the reserves would drop to 292 million. It should actually be 237 million. Because remember, the difference is in this number, I picked up the wrong line. There's 55 million I modeled for regulatory uncertainty, operating risk. Also modeling the stress test. So there should be 237 million, and a drawdown would be 5 million higher, or about 184 million. And then the projected days cash on hand is what I'm showing there, which is next year will be okay. But you can see fiscal years 2026 to 2029 would actually fall below 120 days of cash. Then how do we use this to come up with the reserve targets? So basically, as the methodology we said is, let's have a target reserve so that we can withstand these drawdowns on reserve if this model stress test were to occur. So current reserve targets, as I said, minimum is 120, goal is 300, and upper target is at 490 days. If I were to use this stress test analysis, my numbers would be goal would go from 300 to 315. That's to me is noise. So you can get at 300. The upper target would drop from 490 to 420. And that again is noise, right? Because our models are not that precise. The assumptions are loose. And a lot of this has to do with our estimation of what the volatility of the distribution model is. So these are the current implied targets, as I said, when we will meet in August, early August, or when we preview the budget to the finance committee we will then run we'll come up with new implied targets as consistent with the same market prices again between now and when we budget, which will be in July. Prices will move around. So we will use the same set of prices that we used to set the budget. Refresh the same modeling, same set of assumptions, but we'll update the prices. And then these numbers will bounce around a bit. So we'll come back with those numbers. And we'll have a strategic discussion with the board and with the finance committee in August, and then with the board as to if we should move to the new targets. If these were the targets we implied, I would say all within reason to stay where we are. See these type of bounces. And I would not want to go below 300 days of target, the explicit direction we've got for the rating. Just met with the ones that are lower, gave us a lower rating just last Monday. And they reiterated that that's a good target for us. And of course, they said the more the better. They talked about some other industries that hold really high reserves. No, 300 is what they. And we did not know that when this came out of just our modeling assumptions last year. Last year, the number was at 285. So when we went to the board, we said we could drop to 285 based on the analysis. But the committee, but the rating agency said 300 is he's be targeting to. It's close enough. Any questions on the financial stress test before I move on to the long
Just
term?
curiosity, what's the difference between, in terms of dollar value, 285 to 300 is,
Roughly, it's about each day's cash on hand is about 1.2 million. Our burn rate is about 1.2 million or there.
so 300 is about
300.
400.
Yeah.
400.
Yeah.
What do we currently have?
We are at the last treasurer's report that we issued, we are at 323
Oh, that's good. Okay.
Oh, yeah, we are more than.
days at the target.
I was curious, maybe the history, obviously, can't say it enough, the market's super volatile, but these black swan events, I'm assuming COVID would be one of them, but like what other examples are there, to like of a black swan event from the past that really affected prices that would affect us today?
So the last one, the financial stress test crisis, and there was a big financial crisis going on. Demand died down. Oil prices went within few months from like over $100 a barrel down to really ridiculous, number. Natural gas prices correlated at that time to oil, huge dive. Electricity prices, which is correlated with natural gas prices, took a huge dive. So that could be like one scenario.
But what I'm curious about is like, what is, I totally understand that, but what is it unpredictable or there, I feel like there's usually something that can be pointed to justify these huge either spikes or
After the fact,
decreases.
we can always say what
Uh-huh,
happened, but
I see.
priori, it's hard to know what's
Yeah,
gonna, because that's a billion-dollar question, right? If you know what market's
Sure.
what's gonna happen.
and so maybe going back to pre-COVID, the last economic recession that I can remember was what, around 08, 09-ish, I guess, the mortgage crisis. I can't remember back that far. I obviously wasn't tracking that at that time, energy prices, but what happened to the market during like that last financial
So
crisis?
that's what I was talking about. Let's go to a
I'm sorry to be doom and gloom guy, but I really feel like something's coming.
let's go to
It's
slide 27.
impossible to predict, obviously, but just trying to get a feel for
I just
what
knew
might
you
be
were
the
gonna,
next.
I knew you were gonna ask this. Slide
Slide
27 for you.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
So you can look at the drop in natural gas financial prices. And in a short period of time, see 70% drop.
There we go, yeah,
What we're
yeah.
modeling is somewhere around 40% drop.
Okay.
And you can see for a long period, prices stayed
Yeah,
low.
yeah. That's the part I forgot is it kind of meandered about there. Interesting. Thanks, appreciate that.
All right, so that was a financial crisis, financial stress test that we want prepared for, and we namely use it to set our reserve targets. Now let's talk about long-term load growth. What about, we're in the business for longer than 5 years, right? We've got obligations on our book already that go out 3 years or so. So if you look at, when we were setting the budget, people would, the questions would come from the board, what about load growth? We would say load doesn't really change much year to year. Don't worry about load, that's not the big story. So prices is the story.
Right.
But in the back of your mind, you're thinking about all this electrification that's happening.
Yep.
But part of the reason what we were saying is, if you look at our history, if you look at the chart shows it at least up to 2010, because we were able to readily find this. If you look at California's per capita consumption, it's flat. Load in PG&E service territory in my entire career hasn't changed, despite all the growth. Why? Because of all the energy efficiency measures.
Yeah.
You know, at the state level, at the PUC level, at the utility level. And the state did something unique, is decouple utility revenues from basically sales. Utilities, you get a pot of dollars of sales on your business. Sales goes up and down, you really for that of decoupling. Unlike other states, you can see the per capita consumption, the rest of the country versus California.
Yeah.
Despite what's to happen, though it wasn't the story. But we know that that future is likely not the future we face. The future is very uncertain. Energy efficiency and those measures will still continue, but it'll be unlike the past. So as I mentioned, you know, in the April board meeting, our load forecasting team developed a nice forecast. They talked about how we do the forecast. So same team, Maren and Jessica, put together the uncertainties around their forecast. So here I'm showing you what uncertainties they came up with. And they came up with these various scenarios. In the appendix to the staff report, we describe each of them. In the next slide, I'll show you the parameters around that. But the key highlights that we know that over the long term, there's going to be significant. Not going to be like the past. Electric vehicles, building electrification, data center, load with AI, you know, all over the news. But there will still be energy efficiency behind the meter, PV, batteries, you know, that will lessen the impact. The load growth we're showing in the base case ranges from, compound adjusted growth rate of 1 and 1.5% to cumulative growth rate of 46%. On the high scenario that we model, it shows cumulative growth of about 86%. That's huge, right? Yep.
So the per capita energy consumption, electricity consumption is flat, but then the population is changing, right?
Yeah, but even then, if I look at like my experience, even if I look at PG&E's service territorial load has not materially. I only have to charge for per capita.
Right.
Yeah.
But then the California population is increased.
It's increased, but still, I would not gone up, and I think recently it's come down.
Now for the past 3 days.
Yeah, so if I look at some of the recent number I saw, it's pretty close to when I started the industry. Yeah. Okay, so the little bit about the composition of the load growth load scenarios. You can look at each of these cases. You know, relative to the base case, we have the BTM that's behind the meter reduce the load. We have electric vehicles. We have energy efficiency. Building electrification assumptions. You can see in the high electrification, you know, we have much higher assumptions. And we have behind the meter energy storage, and then opt out. Low load scenario, we assume a 4% opt out of DA. Okay? And the high load is slightly different than the high electrification. That's where we assume more growth coming from data center or AI. So I don't want to go. There's more write up in the staff report appendix. But you can. This is sort of our attempt to say what are some of the uncertainties. We know that these parameters, these drivers will be there. Now, did you get the magnitude right? No one can forecast perfectly, but what's key is we want to understand which driver has what type of an impact as an organization we continue. That's the effort we've undertaken to bring this function. So the next diagram here, this is where we talk about the strategic risks. Okay. We have base case scenario, and we have all these high and low scenarios. Obviously, we plan only for the base case. But what this diagram looks at is, what if we plan for the base case and a high load scenario happens? under a high price, future price, market price scenario or a low future market price scenario. And what if we we plan for the base case and a low load scenario happens? What if the future prices are high and what if prices are low? That's what the box is. Okay, so you can see the colors are also meant they're selected for purpose. Base case, it's not that you're risk-free, but you're more on the neutral side, more neutral than the other cases. The other cases you could either do really well or you could do really worse. The base case is not that you're always doing best. It's just that from a risk perspective, it will have the less risk, less variability. The other cases have more extreme outcomes. So that's an important concept, right? So let's say we plan for the base case actually happens. Such good forecasters.
All right.
So future prices are high, then we sort of have a regret or an opportunity cost. We could say, man, if I had just locked in more of those hedges at those lower prices.
Only we had that crystal ball.
Only had that crystal ball. But on the other hand, if we have lower prices, we also have regret, right?
Yeah.
Like, darn, if I had just not bought and I could just buy now at a cheaper prices. Kind of like what we're seeing in the near-term forward prices that come down. And we're like, if we hadn't hedged as much, we would have locked in the lower prices now. You always have that regret. Risk is never gone. But if you were to model from a risk perspective, planning for base case with a lower risk, the distribution of range of outcomes would be narrower than these other cases where you can be real winners or real losers.
The way I look at it is it's similar to you're going to the car dealership. I want a new car, but is this the right time to go? Are they gonna drop it by $20,000 the next week? You know, the new models are coming out. That's right. Yeah, the new. Exactly.
Okay, so now let's look at the high load case. Like if a high load case happens and a high price scenario happens, right? And we plan for the base case, then we will have let's say our competitors, their high load scenario, what is a high load, not to be high load for us was their base case, where they just accidentally hedged more, bought more. We could have higher portfolio cost and uncompetitive rates compared to them. And moreover, we could have difficulty meeting procurement compliance, tracking resources because these resources are long lead time resources. We may have a hard time finding resources at that time. Of course, low price, I don't have to explain that. If we plan for the base case and prices are lower, we'll just buy them cheaper. So that's why that box is green. Now let's look at the low load scenario, right? If prices, where it hurts us is we plan for the base case and the load turns out to be lower. This is a real concern because now we've locked in at higher prices. And this is what we call stranded cost, right? This is where we have a lot of competitive risks, not just from our existing suppliers, but new entrants can enter the marketplace or portfolio costs. And this is what happened to the IOUs, right? When they were first contracting for renewable solar prices were extremely expensive. Now they're like resource. They were extremely high and they were locking in. So when their load left to CCAs, well, they were protected because they had the CPUC. CPUC said, well, don't worry, you have a PCIA mechanism. So you will be compensated for market cost. But if we did that, we don't have a PCIA mechanism. We cannot go back to where our load departs to and say, well, no, you take our customers, but take the obligations with you. No, the obligations will remain with us, which means we have to dispose of the stranded cost asset at a lower price on the market. That's a key strategic risk in long-term resource planning that we have to factor in. Okay. You guys all with me? Making sense? These are important strategic concepts. So what do we do to manage our risks? Okay. We have a 5-year short-term hedging, our board-approved enterprise risk management, and there we look at the hedging targets that we follow to. And then on the longer term, the strategy is driven by, the procurement group and the regulatory group. They come up with detailed integrated resource plans. But again, this year's plan has got delayed. It's a proceeding. It got delayed till next year. But there they basically do all these modelings, and the chart below shows how our resources, current resources that we've contracted stack against our base case load scenario. You can see going into the 2030s, we're well covered. After that, we'll have some procurement as some of the existing contracts. And the way we do that is we have a current internal target to meet 75% RPS by 2030. Obviously, we have to meet CPUC procurement mandates. They have all these liability-driven mandates to procure resources. And then we have the SB60, SB 350 compliance that 65% of our RPS contracts has to. And we have the goal, road to 2045, driven by SB 100 with interim targets. Is we have to be 60% RPS by 2030 and 100% clean by 2045. So that's what's sort of driving, and we do a sort of, we don't lock in all resources at once. We have a incremental approach where each year we stack up the resources.
Essentially, everybody's doing this, right? This is
Pretty much standard practice. Yeah, so what our current plan and future considerations are is.
How come SB 350 and SB 1020 are stacking on, one says 90% clean energy by 2035, the one 65% RPS?
So 65% RPS is basically says with RPS, 65% of the resources have to be in a contract. You can't just go out in a short-term marketplace. It has to be a long-term contract. That's what the 65% mean. But the target to be RPS by 2030 is 60%. And then to be clean, not just RPS, but anything that's clean, including hydro, even nuclear would qualify. So go to slide 21. This is all coming almost to an end of this discussion. So what is our current plan and future considerations? So we basically, we have studies underway to assess how we're going to get to 2045, approved an analysis with the consultant. And the staff will come back to the board. Plan is to in late summer, early fall to come back with what the study says could be a strategy, that target. And of course, as I mentioned, included in our plan and all compliance targets. CPUC issued compliance targets and and then we also monitor this development of central procurement that our legislative group is talking about, where the state is saying, there should be a central entity that procures on behalf of the state. We obviously have to account for the uncertainty, how much they lock in, and they attribute that to us. That's another layer of uncertainty in how we plan for long term. And then our plan is to continue with the laddered approach for longer term resources. We don't want to contract all 4 months and we don't all resources at once. It's actually impractical. And also we don't want to wait till the end when the load shows up. It's basically, it's like dollar cost averaging in investment, right? We minimize risk, price risk, but also minimize at risk, basically, namely coming from advances in technology. Well, if we had locked in solar when solar prices were really high, we'd be in trouble now, right? Added strategy. Now we were able to take advantage of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've been reading your report, I was like, what is this? Ladder means you do it step by step.
Step by
Okay.
step.
It's like dollar cost averaging in stock market.
And then we also are working with CC Power. Remember, this is a joint procurement that SVCE set up. We want to diversify because we, as you heard, there's risk with PPAs. They don't show up. Oh, they should be showing up. They say, come back to us and say, give us. They open up the contract for renegotiations. So there's a way in which you can diversify that risk by having direct ownership. Thank you, Pat, for sharing some articles on that. And this is also looking at the IRA benefits, where IRA in the Inflation Reduction Act really allows municipalities without a tax obligation to be able to actually directly qualify for those credits. So we're working through CC Power analysis underway to see what makes sense relative to a PPA only strategy.
Now, these tax things have you heard of them? They're really powerful. I mean, they're essentially tax credits that government agencies can get. And they're up to like, I mean, some of them were 25%, some of them were
30% or so.
yeah, of the cost of building projects. So they're very substantial. You have to follow the rules, but the rules didn't seem, I mean, at first glance, they're not that onerous, but I don't know.
Yeah, the IRS recently finalized the rules so that now we're able to do this study. But there's some of the issues there are PPAs also get those benefits, right? So in a competitive market, be able to lower the PPA, which they do. So we do get indirect benefits from PPA from those credits as well. PPAs, they're able to depreciate the assets, so they have a tax base that they can take advantage of depreciation. So we can get direct benefits, we don't benefit from depreciation benefit. PPAs, we're also able to do pre-power prepays. We talked about that at the last meeting. So we have to factor a whole bunch of these things to see economically which makes sense. And then there are some, and then beyond economics, there's some strategic reasons. We want to put all our eggs in PPA basket, diversify, these PPAs don't materialize. So those are the discussions we're having right now.
Wasn't that the reassuring the board, like it's a very big number, the prepaid,
Yes.
but don't be afraid of that number, yeah.
And the last topic here, and we've mentioned this before, but we're not able to make as much progress. Plan is to stop off for that. Is to revisit our hedging targets. We talk about the laddered strategy, 5-year. We look at our hedges. In the near term, we target pretty high level, like near frontiers, like 100% hedge. But if you remember, I talked about the PCIA impact. PCIA prices come down, PCIA goes up, revenues come down. Our power procurement doesn't come. What if we didn't hedge? Let the power procurement costs come down by providing a natural hedge. Something we've always known, right? So if we don't lock in, remember I said revenues hurt, prices coming down hurts us because we take the hit on the revenue. Okay? On the PPAs, on the power procurement side, we don't get the commensurate benefit of price reductions because we've hedged. But what if we didn't hedge, which would reduce the financial risk, because when prices come down, power procurement costs would also come down, while revenues come down. There's an element of hedge there. But the difficulty for us is the PCIA is a black box to us. So it should not be. So it's hard to know how to quantify that impact, how much of that. So it's an analysis that we have to spend quite a bit of time and resources that we were not able to spend the past year or so. We are going to be hiring a new risk manager and another quantitative staff to assist in this effort. Know that this is an important task, even though we don't have the perfect insight. Make some estimations for the impact, reduce our financial risk. So
Is this something that that you work with sort of collaboratively with the other CCAs
Yes.
to talk about how to best do this?
Yes, we do. And actually, one other CCA has recently come to the same conclusion. We've said this for a while now because we always knew that impact was there. And we have taken into account by holding reserves for stress test analysis, but none of the CCAs that said, yeah, we should revisit hedging targets as well. So we're working with other CCAs too now that understanding has come to at least one other CCA.
Because it seems like with all the technology that's being developed, the new technology, just keeping up with what are the sort of the possibilities in the future. That's
Yeah.
not a small task.
Yeah, so this is where like the new gen model that we use for PCIA forecasting is actually sponsored by Cal CCA. They've hired new gen, which well, but we use that model. Kind of either take it in-house and model it. Maybe some other CCAs do, but it comes from Cal CCA initiative. You know, we're doing things like joint procurement, CC Power, talked about. Then we have a risk management group that meets amongst the CCAs where we're talking about these impacts. And how we. Okay, so that almost brings into this part of the presentation. So next step again is we're gonna present this analysis to the board. Remember the very first week, I hope that's clear on your calendar. That's, we'll be meeting because we take the budget to the board in August, and that's when we the stress test analysis to revise our reserve targets. So we'll be previewing that with the finance committee in early August, and then the board will approve those targets along with the budget in
So the
September.
first week of August, you want to make sure we can have a meeting? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I
And
think you
that,
sent us a.
August, not June, right there.
Right.
Okay. Just make sure.
June is the board meeting.
That's
We're gonna
right.
It's just
take
the board
that.
meeting.
Okay.
The next finance committee will be.
Do we have a?
Plan, on a plan basis will be.
Do
the
we have
first
a
week of
board
August.
meeting in August?
Yes, not July though.
Not July, okay. Slightly different vacation for.
That concludes the stress test. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I was curious, so if the horrible thing happens where we go negative on our reserves for whatever reason, what's maybe some of the simpler solutions, raising prices on, that's gonna be one of them, am I assuming
The board
correctly?
doesn't have to. We model it as if the board were maintaining a 1% discount.
Okay,
The board could say, I'm gonna raise my rate. So what goes over PG. Other CCAs have done that.
any other, hopefully we never have to do any of this, but
Yeah, there are things the board can raise the rate. That's one thing. Depend on program expenditures.
oh, yeah,
Say, okay, we need the correct pension. Yeah, the organization, so we'll taper that down. And we can always look at our procurement portfolio and say we don't want to be as with the near term as or
So there are quite a few,
other levers. that
yeah,
we
quite a
can look
levers
at.
we can choose. What is the magnitude of our, programming, the
Program budget.
rebates and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so each year we, by board policy, we direct about 2% of our revenues, about $10-11 million or so towards program. And then each year the board ends up we have a good year, financial year,
Put
like
more into it.
put more into it. Last year we put more into it. I think it was August timeframe. In our prior year budgets, we dedicated more. We have over 100 million or so that's unspent. Thereabouts.
Oh, so we could go for a long time before we actually had to
So
reduce the
the-
prices for the customers, from the customer's point of view.
Yeah, so I mean, we have directed 100 million, we haven't spent it. But the reserve forecast that I'm taking into accounts for that. The accounts that we have that 100 million available, it basically does a forecast of how we're gonna, the spend of that 100 million.
I can't imagine spending 100 million, it just sort of blows my mind.
So, any more questions from the board? First, if not, I will open this to comments. Anybody here or online? Thank you. If not, I'll close the public comments and this is not an action item. Any more discussions?
Crickets. That means we all did our homework, I think, you know?
We did this last year. We do this every year, right?
Yeah. This year we added a longer term look. Load uncertainty.
Well, I guess one thing I would do, talk about what we might want to hear about in the future. Okay, now, I mean, one thing I'd really like to learn a little bit more about is what are the new innovations that you see coming down the pipe that might actually influence our, you know, be important enough to influence the finances of the, as they would bring power cheaply or another source on that.
Human side and resource
Yeah,
technology.
yeah. So for a future meeting, I think I'd be interested in learning. Maybe every few years hearing about it. That part of the
We're waiting for
program?
fusion, but.
Yeah, I'm ready for, we've been waiting
It's
for
only
that.
30 years out.
Yeah, yeah. But, I
Yeah.
haven't been on the board that long, so I don't know if that's just a standard thing we always,
Yeah.
you would keep up with that. I'm really
Yeah, I think
interested.
new technology is always coming. Staff is probably monitoring. In
Yeah.
addition to
Yeah.
government regulations.
Yeah, the other is hydrogen, development in hydrogen.
Mhm.
Those are some of the big ones. Small reactors, these are. And the other thing is the wind. A lot of discussion about offshore wind.
Right.
And that's where focus of the central procurement entity wanted to be limited to their scope B. So that's on the horizon. So I think maybe when I think a lot of this discussion will probably come IRP update when Maren will do the IRP update. She will actually talk about the building of our resources of a the state has their plan. I don't have all the numbers, Maren would know this, but last time they left some as generic yet to be identified. So they have some plans there. That could be a process of, we'll check into it.
And then the other question is, in the process of doing a stress test this time, is there any advocacy that you have, have sort of identified or feel is important or more important than you would have thought previously that we should be as elected officials? And
The key for us in the near term is PCIA impact. Nice if we had more insights into the PCIA so we could plan. PG&E has perfect foresight of what the PCIA is, but we don't. We knew that we would know how to account for the hedge impact as on our portfolio. Like managing a procurement portfolio and a good portion of that, of what you already have, that affects that portfolio hidden from you. Then longer term, creating more of a level playing field, like low stranded cost risk, utilities are protected with the PCIA mechanism where they call it non-bypassable charges. For a utility customers cannot bypass those charges. For us, we don't have that protection. And then the other developments that we bring to the board all the time, central procurement developments, where the state is electing a central entity to basically do procurement on behalf of the state and allocate those costs to us. We want to make sure they don't take our flexibility away to manage our load. We also want to make sure that the allocations that they make are all the developments that we see in the regulatory side, that we talk about with the board.
So one question is, does because you did put the electrification of buildings, but the recent core saying that it's not, can't demand. Is that going to affect your analysis?
It can, I mean, if that's some of the uncertainty around building electrification that acted in some of those ways.
Our city is being asked to modify our electrification
Absolutely.
building ordinance to allow it to not do that.
But you know, one of the things that I think we all want to keep tabs on is there's one thing about, okay, now we can't require it,
Right.
but we're finding that the vast majority of people want to go along with it anyway. And so I think that's something that we need to keep monitor is how many people are really reverting to gas or.
Or the new buildings, we're expecting a lot of new buildings coming up in the next 8 years.
Oh, well, the
right?
new
Yeah.
buildings,
Yeah.
we're not having any problems with, and that'll be interesting to see what Cupertino does,
Right, yes.
but we aren't having any problems with it because it's less expensive. It's significantly less expensive if you don't have to put gas lines in
That's true.
initially. And so none of the new construction, or we're not anticipating any of that will
Okay.
have gas in it because of that.
Even
Good
if you
point.
modify your ordinance to not.
We have
Yeah,
modified our
already,
ordinance,
yeah.
yes.
We'd be asking to do that.
But we see the slot where the gas will stay in as the remodel. The remodels of single family homes.
Yeah.
We see that as, and I think that it'll be interesting for all of us to get together and figure out what percentage of our greenhouse gas component really is that. And apparently Los Altos Hills did some evaluation of that before they went with all the exceptions that they wrote in. Because they figured that, but I don't know how quantitative it was, honestly. But I think that's something we should all be monitoring jointly. Such a difference between what's theoretically possible, and what people actually do.
Okay, any more discussions or questions?
I don't think so.
We will move to item number 3. Fiscal year 2024-2025 budget framework discussion. And again, we're gonna have our CFO. Robert.
All right, so this is a high level discussion. As I said, budget is going to be developed in July, but we want to, so next time we'll meet, we have a budget a draft budget to review and approve and recommend to the board. So at this meeting, we're seeking high level feedback on the way we're going to develop the budget. Methodology, we could tweak it a little bit later if something. So we're going to talk about some of the stuff. Stress test actually already sets the stage for this. We talk about revenue modeling and that. Revenue modeling, where we talked about RA and RPS prices, uncertainty in forecasting benchmark that it creates on revenue side. Talk about reserve targets, that how will we set that, and then the balancing act that the board has to play between funding customer discount rates, additional funding for programs, and the set aside for reserves. Talk about the biggest expense at a high level, power supply costs and some cost drivers. So again, this is just a framework. The next slide is basically our timeline. We'll have this discussion we plan to have this discussion at least currently plan to have it at the high level of the board as well. Reiterate, early in August, we will review the budget. Month of July is when we basically, market prices as a month of July, model all our costs. We'll preview the budget in early August, and then the board will have a draft budget at the August 14th meeting to review and give us any feedback. Based on that, just the budget, any feedback we get from the board, and then when we take it to September, that's when the board will adopt the budget, so that when we start our fiscal year first. And then, as we have done recently in the past couple of years, as I talked about, because of the uncertainty with the market price benchmark coming out and such a big impact it has on our revenues, we we will have another finance committee meeting review once we get market price benchmark numbers coming from the CPC in the fall to give you a better preview of what 2025 will look like. IA and PG&E generates, and therefore our rate projections, our revenue per rate. And then we will ask the board in December to basically sort of adopt the adjusted budget based on that. So when we take the budget in September, what we tend to do is tell the board to make conservative assumptions on discount rates and expenditures. Wait till we have more certainty on the finances, and we make necessary adjustments in this. And then we always do a mid-year refresh of the budget. Our budget in 8 and time frame, and we preview finance committee's approval and recommendation February. Okay. So next diagram, this you've seen, but this pulls it all together, all the very pieces. We talked about the enterprise risk management, how we assessment of risks and opportunities. And Monica's been talking about the strategic focus areas. Our risks basically shapes our strategic focus areas where we want to, as an organization, focus and put priority on, at least in the upcoming fiscal year. And then we set a budget to basically make sure the funding is in line with achieving those objectives, achieve our mission. All right, so on slide 5, revenue forecasting, as I said, is a very difficult, it's the most uncertain tasks. On the left side, we have the current rate projections. One pertinent information that should be coming out anytime between now and 15th is PG&E will issue a preliminary 2025 rate projection. There are generation rates and then the PCIA. So we will basically, by the time when we do the budget computations in July, PG&E's update will already be prices are that volatile. And also, I think PG&E will take very conservative assumptions on RA and RPS costs, market price benchmark forecasting at least this year. And that one. The energy prices, we all look at the forward curves. The forward market is trading that estimate, but estimating where the CPUC will come, right? Benchmarks that are for RA and RPS is very difficult, right? Historical look back, as I talked. So what we will do is we will continue to use the new gen model that we've been using. What we will do is when the PG&E forecast will come out. Remember, the new gen model is PCIA, as I said, is a black box for us. So they are using publicly available data as to the abilities to estimate what that PCIA model looks like. So when PG&E issues its May era update, what we will do is we will say, okay, let's look at what forward prices at least PG&E used for estimating the forecasting their rates. Go back and look at what the forward prices were. Let's put that in the new gen model and calibrate that model to what the rate. Then we tend to adjust the new gen model based on that, what we call the error rate. Last year was like 5%, and the year before it was like. Use the implied margins, revenue projections by this year's model. Calibrate to PG&E results. Okay. So that's sort of the approach we will take. And as I said, this is very uncertain. So the market price benchmarks come out in. And the next slide, this is similar to what I shared in the stress test analysis that showed if I were to do revenue projections right now based on the 3 methodologies I talked about, using region model, RA and RPF prices, which is basically last year's MPV prices. using market prices we see on the market where RP and RA is trading right now, which is very high. Look at the little adjustment factor based on what we observed last year. Then just incrementally using market RA and RPS prices. You can see in the last diagram there, you can, if that were to happen, the PCIA actually would go negative. That's what we call testing. So this is, as I said, this swings revenue forecast on its own, this one element by $200. And that's why the adjustment in December very important. Okay. Reserve targets, I'm not going to spend too much time because we just talked about the stress test. Use the stress test results. Again, our way we'll update the stress test analysis is we will use the same market prices we use to compute the budget. So that price assumptions are aligned. And we will say, what if the stress test were to happen? We want to make sure we build to a reserve target level such that we can, if we were to pull, let's say what did I say, 184 million in reserves, still stay above 120 days of cash. And over 5 years, 90 days. That's the methodology we'll use, again, to pressure our reserve target levels. And slide 8, we talked about additional funding for programs and customer discounts. Again, this is a balancing act. Take, how much, we're basically a cost of service based organization. We're not, money that we don't need to fund the operations and our decarbonization programs or to fund reserve targets, go back to the customer. So the board has to basically say, okay, how much do we give in discount? How much do we build reserves? Make sure the agency can withstand the risk that we face, as well as satisfy requirements for the rating agency. Critical that rating agency as well. Not only does it impact our ability to get into good deals in our purchase agreements that we buy with counterparties, credit rating agencies, but the COLA requirement, remember I talked about the CPUC proceeding? One of the triggers is if CCA were to fall below investment grade, it triggers a whole bunch of posting requirements for COLA. Another reason why we want to make sure credit ratings are well.
What are our credit ratings?
So Moody's rates as Baa1 and Standard & Poor's rates as an A, but 2 levels higher than where Moody's. Where they rated us, Moody's rates CCAs that are not JPAs, but they're like single cities like San Jose or Cisco. They rate them higher because they said on the city's financials, right? Whereas JPAs, we're not able to do so. We had a meeting, as I said, with them last Monday, and besides all the advantages we had, JPAs have as well. So she's basically, the message was that how engaged our board is and how informed our board is, financials and making sure that all that the board actually moved a reserve target. So we were recommending 285 from 285 to 300 because of the feedback we got. Okay, so this is, again, we will start, depending on how financials will come out, we will come up with some spending scenarios for the board to consider. What we will recommend, like other prior years, is a conservative set of assumptions for setting the budget in September, or better scenarios and recommendations in December to the Finance Committee in November. We have a market price benchmark for the
I have a closed session.
No worries.
Sorry.
Thank you for joining us.
did before, so we'll find it.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the slides 9, we talk about the power supply expenses. You know, unlike other businesses or unlike other government entities, this is our biggest expense, greater than 90% the cost of procuring power. Some of the key, you know, the risk we face, you know, as I said, is the volatility in the market prices. Affects us obviously in the procurement cost. You pay the incremental market prices, high RPS and our RA prices to the extent we need them. It's good we have long-term resources, long-term PPAs that we've locked in. Now we're enjoying the benefits of them. When RPS prices are really high, those contracts are really low price relative to what they'll have to pay right now to satisfy those RPS obligations. Incremental RPS prices again. We have new resource adequacy requirements that's coming effect next year, also called slice of day, instead of meeting a single peak for a month, 4 hours of a typical day in a month. That's adding complexity, but we've known about this happening and our portfolio is well positioned for that. Now, one thing, if you remember, we have a target to be 100% clean, right? If you remember the discussion of the last year for the first time, said it didn't make sense last year to be 100% clean. Looks like we're going to end this year at 85% clean. What was the reason for that? Remember the high RPS and RA prices at carbon-free? Carbon-free prices are so high. They used to be around $5 when it was not an issue. Incremental carbon-free attribute prices right now, incremental ones, $8 a megawatt. So the scenario that we talked about last year has not changed. And we think that in this market, paying those prices, we are not really incrementally, in a short term at least, not incrementally reducing carbon. On paper, we would look cleaner. So we're not sure that we don't think that's in the best short-term interest. Take our resources and secure those short-term carbon-free at those prices, rather than to deploy those resources in longer-term strategies, in PPAs, SVCE power to look at direct ownership. So we don't have the targets developed right now, or recommendation, but we're likely not going to be recommending to be 100% clean because for the same reasons, the reasons have not changed. We talked about in 2024. So Chris, our director of our procurement, is developing those recommendations right now and is going to take it to the executive committee meeting, May 4th of this month. We don't have him right now, otherwise we'd have shared it with the finance committee as well. Sure. But he will bring it to the board for approval of that strategy. We will review and then we will base the budget based on those targets.
And when I met with Monica, she, and you too, I think, explained that really you expect this to be like a 5 to 7 year problem. And then because we have big projects coming online, it may go away. But then that was sort of assuming the same power load, I mean, the same amount we need to procure, right? Or was it?
So the carbon-free prices, we don't, there are a lot of corporate players like Amazon and others, Microsoft, that have 100% clean product. So I think those are some of the near-term events that are driving prices. I don't know what these prices will be. I showed you in the stress test analysis.
Yeah.
Which in the near term still stays high and longer term comes down. Some of that is also based on fundamental modeling that Ascend does. It's hard to really predict what's going to happen in this market. But our thinking is that of maybe next couple of years or so, but it will taper down. But we don't know. We don't have that. The other cost, of course, part of the budget is, all the staffing cost and all the contracting costs that we have. In terms of staffing, we've grown quite a bit as an organization last year, right? We added 13 new budgeted positions since September. Since then, we've hired 11 new staff. Currently have 5 vacancies. And of course, we'll be adjusting our salaries for cost of living and merit for this year. And we are reviewing employee benefits. We don't have any recommendation right now, but we are reviewing them. And if we're in a position to recommend any changes, we will bring them to the Finance Committee as part of the budget in August. Our focus on the benefits is to make sure we stay competitive with peer CCAs, we don't after them, and also basically work on the retention of our employees.
And don't make us look bad, like, oh, we're gonna have to cut your bennies, you know, like,
Yeah. And for merit, we're gonna continue with the proposal we had, merit and COLA. Last year, we had budgeted 3%, and of course, it's based on CEO discretion, based on a number of factors. We recommend the same for this year, 3%. I just was looking at another CCA, MCE's merit, they had actually budgeted 4%. I didn't know that, but we were gonna go with the last year recommendation of 3%. But for cost of living adjustment, in addition to merit, we're gonna use the 6-month rolling average of the Bay Area CPIA, which is what we did last year. Currently, that's at about 0.8%. We may get another month in there. SSR is going to be around that number. And in terms of staff headcounts, we expect to be stabilizing at the level we were at right now. We don't expect to hire as much as we did last year. We're still collecting that data, but we currently anticipate at least 3 new headcounts, 2 in the decarbonization area. Again, as I said, we've got that 100 million. The effort is to basically expand that program and make sure there's traction with our customers' programs and making sure we take advantage of that. So our mission. And then we're at least going to need 1 more person in the risk management area. One of the analysis we need to do on the hedging, quantitative works that a consultant does for us, where we lose some insights. It's done by a consultant and not internally, and also it's actually more expensive.
Yeah, I think having worked in government for a long time, I think there's a lot to be said for building the internal bench, that kind of knowledge. It's
You have to strike the right balance.
Yeah.
Because
some things
we can't fully have that level of function because that would take a lot. And again, we're subject to 1 or 2 people that off an area, they leave, fall back on the consultant. So we're going to play that balance role. We keep the consultant enough. Each staff member were to leave, we leverage them, but at the same time.
Yeah. And also, it seems like there are a lot of collaborative efforts being set up with other CCAs.
A lot of the CCAs use the same, and we benefit from that exactly. So those are some of the highlights of how we're going to be using to set the budget. Next steps is, that's the same framework, the same presentation. Take this to the board back so that we have that feedback before we do all the analysis in July. Again, we will final recommendations of cut. We'll come with a customer discount level based on the July analysis, but really the more definitive spending and discount levels we expect the board to decide in December, and more certainty on our financial based on CPUC rates coming out. And again, we're going to present the draft budget in August, early August, to this committee, and then we'll adopt it. That's sort of the high-level discussion on the frameworks, and I'm certainly open to any feedback the committee wants us to consider, talking about certain assumptions. And
just one of the most recent things you just talked about, I did want to acknowledge, I think the mentality for hiring at the moment seems really sound, like the couple of positions that you just mentioned, like that just makes sense to me. So Just wanted to make that statement.
I would also like to add that, having worked in government for many, many years, I've observed that when we have slowdowns in tech, we have more opportunities to hire here. So we should take advantage, we should staff up as much as we can next year because the pool of applicants is just gonna be bigger.
Yeah, there has been quite a lot of layoffs in recent
There has, and
years.
I know, working at the water district for years, we, in the years when tech was really strong, we would go out 2 and 3 times to recruit for a position. And then when a bunch of layoffs started, we would get 100 people apply for these positions. So we could just, because government provides a lot of stability.
Right.
And, and especially this kind of technical work is very interesting to many people who are in tech. So I just keep saying that this is not the time for us to cut back on who we hire, quite the contrary.
And there is this odd phenomenon going on right now. There's this trend with in the corporate world where they're posting jobs available, but in reality, they're not really hiring there. It's just to
Oh, interesting.
yeah, just to look like, hey, we're still a thriving company, we're still hiring. That's the new trend right now. It's real recent. It's been going on for at least a year now, where they have hundreds of applicants for the same job, and they're like, oh, interesting. They'll go through the interview process. They have just enough staff to interview these folks, or they'll just have the application go into limbo mode where they never hear back. But that is a trend. So there are awful lot of people, especially in our region right now, that are dying for work. And I think that we really are a crown jewel. And I agree with you that I feel like it is in a way opportunity. I understand well, we hired a lot last year, and I do like these key positions sound fantastic, but yeah, we do have an opportunity here to find like really the cream of the crop, I think, at this moment.
And so, for instance, if we wanted to have some temporary positions,
Sure.
like normally, you can't fill temporary positions for government agencies, but now you probably could. So if you,
We do
and that's,
have those programs. We have the fellows program. Where we hire people coming from the
yeah,
they come in and we ended up by actually hiring a few of those. We also have intern program.
Right, I was gonna bring that up, yeah.
but you can have, you could also have a position that is hired to work on a specific project.
Yes.
That's only, it's supposed to be like 3 years. And that position terminates, and sometimes you can find work for that individual and sometimes you can't. But the agency isn't obligated to keep them on.
Those we tend to have a staff involved with a consultant. We haven't been I don't think we've done a contract where we'd hire an employee and say.
It just happens. Let me tell you that.
Let you go in 2 years, but I see.
It happens.
Ultimately, it does, come down to numbers, right, in
Yeah.
the end. So I trust you guys on which key positions should still be filled. But are there any that you haven't mentioned that are maybe like wish lists where it's like, well, we don't really have the numbers for that, but like maybe in the near future, if we see an
So
opportunity?
we will have more fine tuned. This is just
Okay.
preliminary.
Oh, great. Good to hear.
No, we want to hire these 3.
Okay.
We haven't finalized, we will, pulling right now, all the departments. Budget for next year.
But anyway, just the comment that we feel like this is a good opportunity for Silicon Valley Clean Energy to hire. This is a good time.
Agreed.
So follow up with staffing. These positions are pretty specialized. I'm Silicon Valley Clean Energy jobs, not everybody can. So do you cultivate, what you look at, do you cultivate knowledge? I think that's important.
We do both. We cultivate, as I said, we bring interns, we train them, and then those who take to hiring them. And for certain key, very technical roles, like the risk management of the country, so we can have remote employees. Look for opportunities. Some of these are very difficult positions. more opportunities that
Another thing that, while we're talking about it, I don't know if you recruit at the SWE, convention. The SWE, Society for Women Engineers. They have a convention every spring, and they have the biggest recruitment fair I have ever seen. They're usually upwards of 6,000 young engineers. They're not all female, but lots of them are female, rising out of graduate programs and bachelor's programs. And they set this up so prospective employers you can just have a booth, tell people about jobs, or you can actually pay a little more and set up and have interviews on site. But I was just astounded that this thing has been going on for like 40 or 50 years, very, very well established. And at the Water District, we found it was really good.
yeah.
So that remote opportunities, I think, opens up for.
Yeah, that opens
Yeah, for technical jobs,
Right.
really.
And it's sweet, it was really interesting because, Google was there too, right? And we could say, well, if one of you in the couple gets a job at Google, you've got a lot of volatility, and then if another one of you works at the Water District, this is like a really good, solid career path for a family. So anyway, I can't say enough good about Society of Women Engineers recruitment.
Okay, any more discussions, questions? If not, I'll open up for public comment. Nobody present, how about online? Joe, and we're gonna close the public comment and no further discussions. So the dates for the next meeting will be August, the first week of Monday of August? Or we're gonna-
There's something on here, probably gonna
Yeah.
Okay. So
We'll get our
next one will
official
be in
email,
August.
yeah.
That's right.
So any comments from staff? If not, the meeting is adjourned.
All right.
At 9:48.